What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Star Wars Explained. Today, we are going to continue a conversation that we started 2 weeks ago about Trials of the Jedi, the final book in the High Republic publishing initiative. So please welcome Charles Soule back to the show to talk full spoilers about the novel. Be warned if you haven't read it yet, because we're really going to dive in.
Yeah, thank you for having me back on. It's funny that we seem to be wearing exactly the same shirts we were wearing when we spoke 2 weeks ago.
If I
But
don't have to do laundry, I just keep wearing the same clothes. I haven't left the house in 2 weeks. It's fine.
fantastic. All right, well, I'm excited to talk about spoilers. I have not really. I think I've had one conversation that got into spoiler territory before this one, so I have not had a chance to talk in detail about what happens in the book, other than with the internal stakeholders, the editors and stuff. So I'm very looking forward to this. So hit me. What do you got?
Well, what does it feel like to just start to talk about it more publicly? A book that's been kind of under wraps for so long. What are those first feelings?
It's like it's like I know I wrote it, but it's also like I've seen the coolest movie around and I want to talk with other people about it, but I can't. And so it's like the feeling of that. If like you got an early screening of some cool movie and you wanted to talk to all your friends about it, but none of them had seen it yet, like finally getting to have those conversations is what this feels like. And I know how that sounds a little bit because, as I said, I recognize I wrote the book, but still it feels how it feels.
Well, the High Republic has been a story that was planned out from the start, but obviously things are going to change along the way. Like we know that Stel and Geos perishing in the Fallen Star was not an original part of the plan. So were there
Mhm.
any surprising changes that you felt you had to make while writing Trials of the Jedi?
And this is all spoiler friendly, so which is weird. Like my instinct is not to say these things, but I will try to fight against that instinct and see what I can do. Well, let's see. The very very end of the book was something that I rewrote like 5 times, and I'm talking about the absolute last chapter, which reveals the fate of Markian Row.
Hmm.
And there were I Markian to me is really the central prime mover of the entire thing, the entire High Republic saga. And so his ending was extremely important to get right. And there were versions of it that um, worked differently, basically, and had different emotional impacts and had different like descriptions of what happened to him and how it happened. And some were more vicious, some were less vicious. And so I was working on that. Literally, it was the last edit I made to the entire book, was tweaking a sentence at the very end. But the initial version of how he was going to go, like how his ending would work, was something we all assumed would be this other version for like since we were starting to work on phase 3. So it was like 2 years. We all were like, oh, it's going to go this way. And then I wrote it that way because that's what we had all kind of planned. And then I read it and I was like, I'm really not sure about this. And so I ran it by, Mike and Tom Holer over at Del Rey Random House Worlds. And like, there was a sense that maybe the assumptions that we made back in 2023 weren't holding water anymore. And so I wrote it another way, and there was a sense of how does that feel, and like it was a lot. So that ending was definitely something that time was spent on and time shifted. The identity of the nine. I mean, this is something we spoke about in the non-spoiler interview, but like I don't think it really does me any favors to talk about other versions of the book or other versions of the story, but certainly I considered other membership on the team. What else? I mean, I think I didn't really think about other deaths. I mean, Torben was somebody who was going to die relatively early. That was something that we talked about. I got Daniel's approval to do it, and he was like, "Fine, yeah, absolutely, go for it, do it." But it was I have always I've never really loved that the High Republic has been associated with character murder in the way that it
You were
kind of
building
has.
up to so many questions I have prepared. This is great.
Yeah, I like it's not really what we ever set out to do, and I think it's kind of, I don't know, like people coming into these books expecting to see these like heart-rending deaths and so on and so forth. And I think if you look at something like like Song of Ice and Fire, right? The George R. R. Martin series, like it's introduced with these wild, incredible plot twists, but then as things go on, those maybe are there's still plot twists, but the wanton destruction of characters and deaths is reduced to some degree. And I think with the High Republic, it just like death is part of it, and there is a lot of loss that happens in Trials of the Jedi, both right up front and kind of off screen. But if a death happens, it's because a death needs to happen and is part of the story, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of it, or like slaking some kind of weird bloodlust in the fandom. Like that's not something that we ever really wanted to do. So so I'm trying to think of any of other things that would have changed. I mean, not so much like pacing, there were versions of the story where like just, like events were shifted around. It's kind of the normal process of getting through a book. When I do it, I write one draft all the way straight through, which is not, it doesn't have the like super polished prose. It's more just like laying out the sequence of events. And then I go through and I polish that prose to shine it up and make it be like, okay, this is worth reading for an outside person. They read it. I have some outside readers who read stuff very early, get their notes, and then I do a third pass, which is what goes to like the editors and things like that. And so by the time it's there, things are pretty well locked in, at least for as far as I'm concerned. You get notes back and you edit and you change, but most of it, the weird POVs, Tarek's POV chapter, Ember's POV chapter.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah, I there was a little bit of those were question marks in part of the editorial process about like, is this too off-putting? Is it too abrupt for readers to be able to jump into this very alien point of view at this point, Aslan's point of view chapter, with sort of him talking to the dark side or himself, depending on how you look at it. Those were points that had to be kind of finessed a little bit, but basically what you see is what I did.
Well, man, you set up so many questions that I could build off of that. So I'll start kind of back with marking on row. And yeah, you bring up that the High Republic got a bit of a reputation for breaking hearts and killing off characters. And I think that is more a testament to how much people loved Loden Greatstorm and Stellan Geos and Orla.
Yeah.
Like, of course, people die in Trials, but I think that you got to the conclusions of so many character arcs without making it a bloodbath. Like Markion's fate is arguably worse than death for him. Avar and Elzar, they get this very mythical ending that is sacrificial, but not through their deaths. So what is the mark of a good character ending in your mind?
I think, the first word that popped into my head is just satisfying, right? Because if you've been following this character through one book or through 60 books, you know things about them, and you want an ending that feels earned by all of the trials you've seen them endure. And so let's see, who's a good example is like Reath, right? Like, so Reath Silas in this book has an ending that I think has been built to since he was introduced in Into the Dark. He's Claudia Gray's character, to the extent that any of these characters are like, that we all work on them, we all write them, but she created him and created the archetype and created, did a lot of the fundamental work to make him what he is. But then so many other people throughout the initiative have finessed that and have the whole Reath and Aslan, Hannibal Lecter, Clarice Starling kind of dynamic that materialized in some of the earlier books in Phase 3. And how he feels about that, and how Comac kind of left him in the lurch a little bit when he was not really ready to be left in the lurch, and how he feels about being a Jedi, and how he feels about adventure, and how he feels about knowledge, and what his role is within the Order. All of those things built up to a very rich and very dynamic and very interesting character who I believe he's coming into his own throughout most of the kind of Wave 2 and Wave 3 books in Phase 3. And then here is where I think he makes a decision that is very balanced. It's kind of like I've always sought knowledge. I've always like thought there was more to learn than I personally know, and that's where my happy place is. That's where the Force has put me. And his ending, where he rejects the dark, but he doesn't reject it in a way that says it's useless and has no place. He says it's not for me, but at the same time, we need it, which I think is a very nuanced approach that a scholar would take. And the way that he has his confrontation with Aslan, and the way he uses everything, he basically does what Aslan has done to him throughout the first chunk of the initiative. Like, Aslan is very manipulative and knows exactly the buttons to push, and Reith does that to Aslan.
Mm-hmm.
He shows what he has learned, and makes Aslan do what he needs Aslan to do in a way that is still Aslan's own choice. There's no like forced manipulation or anything like that. He just puts Aslan in a place to show how well he understands him, and gives him what he wants, while also getting what the galaxy needs. And it's a very, like, considering where he was at the beginning of Into the Dark to where he ends up, and the choice he makes at the end to go after Aslan, and just sort of see. It's not like I'm hunting him down. It's not a Porter Engle kind of vibe. It's like, I'm just going to see. Feels very, very earned. And so, but the things that happen to him in the last third of Trials of the Jedi, I feel like are informed by every other writer's decisions with him throughout the whole thing. And I tried to do that with everybody. Some characters have more time in the initiative than others. Like Ty Yorick is largely confined to Cavan Scott's his line of comics that he wrote featuring her. But still, she's a very interesting character that has a different set of opinions about things than many of the other characters in the book, particularly the Jedi characters. And so giving her an ending here where her perspective shifts because of the time she spends with the Jedi, I think felt earned. It felt like something that would happen to her, and how she would feel about it. And so, to answer the question you asked, how do you do it? You just try to put yourself in their head and say, how would I feel if I was in this situation? What are the choices I would actually make, or the choices this character would actually make that seem reasonable and like legit, as opposed to this out of nowhere thing that they might do?
This makes me just how many times did you read like all of the High Republic? Because I imagine that, yeah, you have to go back for each of these characters and be like, yeah, where did Reith start? What was his journey? And
Sure.
yeah, getting him from a point of Into the Dark being I don't want to leave the Jedi Temple, I'm happy here in the
Mm-hmm.
archives, to
Yeah.
no, I'm going to go off and I'm going to hunt for Aslan.
Right. I mean, I don't have time. I did
Right.
not have time to read them all like 7 times in a row, but I read it all. I went back and I reread important things that I knew would be important for what I was doing. And then if there were like, what's a good example? Like Arkoff and Aslan's relationship, which is largely explored in the Edge of Balance manga,
Mhm.
which I had like read, but I hadn't read. So I had to go back into that. And even though that's a very minor element of Trials of the Jedi, you still want to know what the other writers have done. So I would say, like, I read it, and then that gave me the facility with the stories to be able to go back in and say, well, okay, I know that, for example, the lightsaber Barnabas Vim, I know is I'm pretty sure it's on Planet X. It's on the Nameless homeworld, but I want to make sure. And I know that George Mann wrote about those characters in his like Quest for Planet X and Hunt for all those stories that he did. And so it's in there, and I can find it, and I can figure it out and look for the sentences that explain what, is it legit for Aslan to find his lightsaber on Planet X, which, again, very weird to be saying that out loud, but that is what happens.
Oh yeah, like chilling ending for him. I thought that we were moving to a place for redemption for him, and you really pulled the rug out from under me.
No, I think he's somebody who, Aslan Rel is somebody who has been kidding himself for a very, very, like, centuries, and this is the moment where he opens his eyes, so to speak, and realizes what he's always been, and always kind of wants to be, and like, that moment of clarity that addicts sometimes have,
Hmm.
or bad actors sometimes have, like, hey, wait a minute, are we the baddies, that kind of thing. And Aslan is a dark sider through and through, and it took this crisis of actually facing down and then turning his back on the thing that he was most afraid of, the Nameless, for him to actually become the full on dark side user that he, not a Jedi, like he's on whatever path he's going to be on, which is very exciting. Like, I think it adds a flavor to the overall set of the storytelling that just makes it cooler, like it's neat to see that it doesn't, people, it's a happy ending for him that might be a very unhappy ending for the rest of the galaxy, or whoever he encounters, right? Like it puts the story and the events of the story into this kind of moral gray zone. Not to say that he's a gray Jedi, because those don't exist, but like a gray area that just makes it more interesting. It's just more interesting.
And it's just in line with what George always said, that it doesn't matter. He had good intentions for in his mind
Hmm.
for going to the dark side, but like, yeah,
Yep.
if you start down that path, forever will it dominate your destiny. So it does make some sense. But yeah, just because I thought he was a complicated monster, and I was like, I know you've killed thousands of people, but I'm still kind of rooting for you.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think he was lost like a long time
mhm.
before this. He was long gone, well before we meet him in Shadows of Starlight. But you know, who knows? There's always a chance. I mean, if Darth Vader can come back, anybody can probably come back.
And that's, I will not put you on the spot because I'm sure you can't talk about it, but I'll just say to the powers that be that the story of Aslan and Wreath is something I would very much like to continue reading, if that's a possibility, just putting that in the universe. But
Yep.
uh
I
I
mean, that Quarter Angle. There's lots of stories to be told
of
for
course, well,
sure.
I mean, you've got the broken blade is floating out there somewhere.
Hmm.
So Um, I did kind of take you off the hook for having the High Republic as a reputation for killing off characters, but like you said, you did kill off buckets of blood. So,
Yes.
why that character in particular? It is I like that you got Daniel's approval and everything, but
Hmm.
how did that choice come to be?
It was important to not, I'm sure you know the term plot armor,
Hmm.
right? And just for anybody listening who doesn't know that term, plot armor is when a character is so beloved, or they appear in other media, or there are various reasons why they won't die in the story you're reading. And for better or for worse, a number of the Luminous Nine had plot armor around them, and so it became important to allow some of the lineup to be characters that could be that didn't have plot armor. Let's put it that way. And Arkoff, Tarek, Torben, a lot of the people on the B team, like there are we really tried to figure out a way to bring jeopardy into the story. And although, now that I'm thinking about it, like really the only character, in my opinion, who actually had full on plot armor in the entire, I guess there are two. I would is well, Ember is one. Like there was
Yeah.
no way I was going to actually kill Ember. Like I wanted it to seem like put her in danger a
Yep.
lot, like make it really scary. But like I would never in a billion years have killed Ember.
There were
I would have
definitely
never
moments
hurt
where
her
I'm like,
anyway.
he's not. Like I was
Yeah,
finding out that she
yeah,
stowed away on the ship. You already upset me, and I was like, he wouldn't.
yeah,
He
yeah,
wouldn't. Is he? He
yeah.
wouldn't.
It was. I mean, it was a close call though. Like she definitely could have, if not for like Buryaga, who's the other character I would have really, really, really had a hard time disposing of. Not that I couldn't have done it. I probably could have, if there was a really good reason and I had a really good way to do it. I could have, but Ember was really the only one that could not go. Um, but then Torben, I don't know. It just felt like he was such a, like, in the way that he had appeared in the rest of the initiative. He was this like cheerful big dude who liked to cook, liked to laugh, liked to basically we saw him interacting with younglings, primarily younglings and Padawans. So he was very much like a mentor character, and like your quintessential good dude, and who didn't like to fight, and that was a big part of it. Like he was a very reluctant kind of warrior, and so it just felt like, I don't know, it just felt right. Like if and I don't want to say we had to kill anybody, because I've said at length in this interview and others we didn't, but it just felt like it was his time. And sometimes you can just, like the way he goes is so tragic.
Mhm.
That beat where a Nameless attacks him and takes his arm off, and he's bleeding out and he's dying. And this is in the middle of the battle where the Nameless are slaughtering each other. And the Jedi are doing everything they can to try to stop that, because they know that every Nameless that dies means many multiples of people die out in the larger galaxy. But Burryaga sees his friend being killed by a Nameless, and so he throws his lightsaber, and it's going to take the Nameless's head off and kill him, and then Torben, in theory, could be saved, but that would mean the Nameless would die. So Torben, I'm telling you this, you already know what happens in the book, but Torben holds out his hand and he stops Buryaga's lightsaber in midair, because he is a healer, right? He is there to save lives. He even though he's losing his own, he will not allow that Nameless to be killed, if it means other people are going to die out in the further galaxy. And it felt like a way to illustrate the heroism, the like beyond heroism of the Jedi in a way that was very visceral, literally, I guess. And it just felt like a great scene. And sometimes that's all that you need, is if it's a great scene, it should be in there.
I mean, yeah, I did know what was going to happen, obviously, but you just gave me chills walking through it again. Just such a wonderful scene of, yeah, Torben prioritizing the Nameless and everyone else when
Mm-hmm.
he could have, in theory, been saved. It did feel very much in line with his character. Also, the line that blood buckets of it, like,
Yeah,
come on,
yeah.
what are you doing?
I had notes on that. I was like, you know what? No, this is staying. I think it's one of those, like, it just felt like, sometimes if you're not doing those things, and whatever they might be, right? Like, that's an example. There's many others of them. Like, I think the scene with Joss, Adrian, and Slendo the bartender on Ariadu is another example of like where I wrote it, that felt just the way I wanted it to feel. And there was a little bit of like, is this really, like, this dude's just like he's getting kind of buzzed in a bar while his pregnant wife's at home? Like, this is what's going on here. And it just felt like, like, you gotta have fun sometimes. The scene with Ember, when it's in her point of view and she's thinking about what Buryaga and Bell mean to her, and like, she's remembering her time on Elfrona before she hooked up with the Jedi, and like, there's weird stuff in there, and it's, like, it's very hard work to make one of these books at all when you're writing within the larger Star Wars universe. And sometimes you have to do some stuff just for you, otherwise you what's the point of doing it? And so there are elements all throughout Trials of the Jedi that are just things that I thought would be fun and interesting, and a way for me to stretch my own writing muscles a little bit. And while that Buckets of Bloodline wasn't necessarily a stretch, it just makes me, I don't know, just makes me laugh every time I think about it.
And I mean,
Go.
the way I read it, it did kind of make me chuckle, but also I thought it was a great way to take something that throughout the series had been a bit of a
Yep.
joke. I mean, the first time it's said in the comic, all the younglings are like, what did he just say? Like, it's
Yep.
been something that's funny, and then for the last time we see it, it's gut wrenching. Like, I found
Yeah.
it to be very tragic, and also
Yeah.
like
Yep.
I was just like, come on, Charles, like, what, you're twisting the knife a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. But I mean, I don't know. Like, I say I don't want the High Republic to be known for deaths and murder and all that stuff. But I guess if you're gonna do it right,
Yeah.
right?
I love that you just mentioned Slendo, because I wanted to talk about
Mm-hmm.
some of the additional characters that you brought in, the new faces, and I loved him. And you talked about the Blight family and everyone that you set up in Light of the Jedi. How do you create these compelling characters very, very quickly? Like, they just become iconic so fast. And maybe it's just that you give them great lines like "Dead men don't pay their tabs."
Yeah.
Absolutely
Mm-hmm.
awesome. But yeah,
Yeah.
Slindo became very cool very quickly.
Yeah. He's a rough old guy who wasn't gonna take it anymore. I don't know how I do it. It's like, how does a it's playing an instrument, right? Like, it's just something my writing voice enables me to do. And I just try to, like, I see them very clearly in my head. Usually, like, I can picture that guy right now. I can picture him doing everything he does. Um, and I don't know the how of it. I just know that it is something that is, I'm glad I have the skill, because you want to be able to get in and out quickly in these things, if you can, right? You don't always have a lot of time to dwell on these characters. And if you can create somebody who makes an impression with very few details and very few lines, and just, it just lands, you remember that person, you can see them clearly as the reader, then you do it, because it's in this is essentially an action book, right? Like, it's an action adventure book. And so you never want to drag down the pace. You always want to have something happening that is either thrilling or tension filled. There's a reason that the third chapter of the book, I think it's the third, it's the second full chapter, but it's the third chapter you read, because there's the Blight family, and then there's the Jedi Temple, and then there's the big set piece in the Senate building, with when Lena So has repurposed the Senate building to look like the galaxy, and which I thought was cool. But there's a reason that chapter starts with a ticking clock, like literally. Her aide is like, Noril Quo, is like, we've got 15 minutes, that's it, tick 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 tick. And so you do that so that in the back of the reader's mind, they're always like, oh, that clock is ticking down. What is it ticking down to? What's going to happen? What is the thing? And so if you're doing this kind of book, that stuff needs to be all throughout. And so you don't have a lot of time to sit and dwell on the finer details of a character. It's got to be established in very, very few brushstrokes, but those brushstrokes have to be bright and precise so that the reader can just see the character in their mind.
And this all takes place on Ariadu, and the most famous character from Ariadu would be Grand Moff Tarkin. But
Yep.
what was it like to write the Tarkins and the people of Ariadu? But this time we're rooting for them, but you still maintained their intensity and their violence.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that comes from the fantastic James Luceno book, I think, Tarkin.
Mm-hmm.
Which I read and just loved. I've yanked so many things from that book. The Carrion Spike pops up all over my my stuff, because I just thought that ship was really cool, and like there's lots of elements that I really enjoyed in Tarkin, and it's cool to be able to think that Williff Tarkin, the Grand Moff that we see in the original trilogy, came from somewhere. Like his characteristics, his ruthlessness are like inherited traits, right? And I think that's probably accurate. Like people like that don't generally just emerge from nowhere. Like they come from an environment that shapes them to be that kind of person. And within this story, you have the home planet, which interesting. I always called it Ariadu. You called it, how do you say it?
I said Ariadu, but
Ariadu.
Twi'lek.
Have either of us ever heard it pronounced out loud, or are we just like saying it how we say it?
I guess we could pop back to the Tarkin audiobook and see.
Audiobook, yeah. Anyway, I'm going to keep saying it Ariadu. You say it how you say it.
Marchion, Marchion, yeah, it's
exactly. It's very much in the Star Wars tradition. So we knew, like, because the Ariadu is like a final. It's one of those like linchpin locations where a lot of things happen toward the end of Wave 3, Phase 3, Wave 3. The Battle of Ariadu was always going to be kind of where the Nihil get defeated, and so you see it in Kevin Scott's comic line. You see it in the Star Wars Insider books or stories that Lydia King was writing. You see it in Daniel Jose Older's High Republic Adventures books, and maybe others that I'm spacing right now. But it was that final battle was really important. And if you're going to set something there, you want to use the Tarkins. And I think one of the reasons it became the place that we set that final set of battles is because of the set piece you get in Light of the Jedi when Kassav is trying to manipulate an emergence to like blackmail the Ariaduans, and they are introduced in that book as like the people you do not mess with, and they very quickly and thoroughly execute the people who they feel were responsible for bombing their planet. And so now you've kind of set up this sort of a Chekhov's gun situation where these people are extremely ruthless and badass, and you want to see them get their moment to strike back, basically. And so that's what you get. It was cool. I think, having a planet of ruthless, terrifying, scary people is something that's a wonderful trope in sci-fi. I mean, there's lots of them, Klingons, whatever. Like it's something that we see, the Predators, right? Like there's all kinds of versions of the idea, and Star Wars's version it's not exactly the same. Like, Ariadu is a civilization and stuff, but it's it was fun to be able to write people who take zero guff, and the when they are in a position to fight back against the Nihil, they do it with gusto.
Well, moving over to another planet, I want to talk about Planet X or
Yeah.
Sophros or the Balance. I
Yeah.
love it's got more names now. Um,
Uh-huh.
I am considering that similar to like the Wellspring of Life or Mortis, like a
Mhm.
very mystical, mythological realm of the Force. So, what was it like creating a new place like that?
Yeah, yeah, we all did it. I mean, it's interesting because I think of the 11 of us, plus one, right? So I'm going to include Mike Siglain in this. This was a location that Mike had a very clear vision for.
Hmm.
And while we all wrote it in various ways in various stories, I think the first time we saw it was my Eye of the Storm little tiny little comic miniseries that came out right at the end of phase one when Markian goes there to harvest some Nameless. But then we saw it in various other stories, obviously through phase two, and then in phase three, it's all over the place. So the feeling that Mike referenced multiple times when we were coming up with it was Skull Island, from King Kong. The idea that there's
Yeah.
this place that's removed from time and has its own evolutionary system and is generally like a very very scary place, because everything is trying to kill everything else, and it's full of giant monsters and giant bugs and all kinds of business that you see in Trials of the Jedi and a lot of the other stories. And the basic way that it was constructed was the exterior is essentially the light side, the interior is essentially the dark side, and then there's this place inside both of those where they kind of connect, and that's where you meet the Nameless and have the crash at the end where the Nameless eggs pop up and so on and so forth. And so the idea was that because the planet was so far out of balance, the light side had become deeply like just enraged, and it was like striking out everywhere it could go, and like it was bad news up there. It was chaotic up there, but full of energy, right? It was full of like full of life, whereas the dark side, the interior, was more just, again, it was everything in the dark side is eating everything in the dark side is a predator. Every creature there is born to consume other creatures of whatever size. Does an ecosystem like that actually work in practice? I don't know. It does on Planet X, and so it became this like it's a very scary place. Like if you weren't a Jedi, I don't think you or Markian Row, I suppose, or Ember, it would be very difficult to survive there for very much time. And so that was what we wanted it to feel like. And if there's one note like I got through multiple drafts on Trials of the Jedi, it was from Mike. Mike wanted to push Planet X farther and farther and farther and make it wilder and stranger and bigger and more intense. And I think we landed in a really good place with it, because it does feel like that. It feels like if you set foot on that, if you or I did as non-force sensitive people, we'd be done for in about 30 seconds.
And that's really interesting. I love what you just said about the imbalance. This is kind of what I gathered, that when we see it in phase two, it feels very different because a lot of non-force sensitives go there to
Yep. Yep.
steal the eggs, and it's
Hmm.
yeah a little more chill. And so yeah, I had written down that I liked how crazy everything seemed there now.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, that was a really fun thing, and I wanted to go back to phase two actually because there
Hmm.
we meet a creature they call the Underdweller, and we see the Protector. So, am I correct in that the Protector is actually the natural state of a Shrieker, and the Underdweller is just one of those monsters from the underground dark side realm of Sophros?
I think that's a pretty fair assumption. I think that you know, I as we talked about before we started this, I listened to your review of the book before we started doing this interview, and I know that you want answers to these
I
questions.
mean, that's the
That's
look at the
I
name of
know
the
that's your
channel. Yeah.
fucking trade. That's the job, right? I don't want to give
Uh-huh.
necessarily that many answers. If I wanted to put a real pin in those things, they'd be pinned in the book. And so I think what I think, and I looked at this a bunch of times to make sure that I was playing fair, is that the answers you need to give yourself a sense of what was going on are in the book, are in the stories. And if you over explain, you lose something. And so I think that different people experience things at different times. Like the way that a Star Wars has this sort of sense of like all the times are kind of the same technologically,
Hmm.
philosophically, whatever. That's not, I don't think that's true at all. That's like a false impression. And if you were to think of something that happened in 1825, I bet you would have a difficult time doing it. If you were to like say, well, what would a person from 1825 think culturally if they encountered this? You know, would they, a person who was living in, let's say in Nebraska in 1825, would they recognize a tiger? What would they think a tiger was? Maybe they would have no idea what a tiger was because, from another part of the world, and the world wasn't the same. And like all of those things are, the cultural references are different. The way people perceive things is literally very, very, very different. So what someone saw and understood and named in phase two could be very, very different from the way Avar and Elzar perceive and interpret that thing at the end of phase three.
And I mean, you basically just kind of answered. I was going to ask you about balancing direct answers without over explaining the mythology. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that you have done that. As you know, I'm someone that does like to have the answers, but as you know, I compared Trials to Andor season 2, where there were some
Yeah.
things. I adore that show. I adore all of the High Republic, but like there were some things that Andor jumped over, and I was like, I did want the answer to that, but they let you, and you also let fans connect those dots on our own, and we get to theorize and have fun speculating. So you're right that you did say enough.
I hope so. I mean, I think the book is a feast of lore for people who are interested in that kind of thing. It connects so many different, I don't know, like the fact that George Mann's like young reader middle grades are so like they're crucial
Mhm.
to this storyline. The events of those books, you don't have to have read them ahead of time. It's all explained, it's all in there. But like literally the choices that the explorers and the Jedi make in those books, like the people in this book would be like screwed if they hadn't done it. Like it would not have ended the way that it does. And so I don't know. I just love that. I love that if you want the answers, if you want to put the pieces together, they're all there, but you also don't need them. I don't think like you can enjoy this book on its own. I do believe that. And I think that I suspect that is, I've been saying all along that you can pick up Trials of the Jedi and read it cold. And I have a feeling that there will be people who would be like, what is that guy talking about? You can't. But I don't know, whatever. I stand by it. I kind of think you can.
That's I really do. I need to find someone who did that, because that's
Right.
the complete opposite of my perspective. And in my head,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yeah, all of the pieces are put into place, and so I'm curious to talk to someone who just started and ended with Light and Trials. But as a completionist, yeah, it felt very satisfying to have all
Mm-hmm.
of those elements coming together in the whole cyclone.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Well, I'm glad.
yeah. Now that we know the full picture of the Shriek Array, I
Mm-hmm.
would love to go back to the beginning and hear how all of you initially developed this concept and their connection to their world and their connection and role in the Force.
It so I think this has been talked about, but early on, we all kind of pitched an idea for what we thought Project Luminous could be,
Mhm.
and in the end, a lot of that was used. So even though we each had our own sort of like, well, this is what ours would be, beginning, middle, and end. A ton of things like the Nile were in my version of the story, and so like bringing them into to this just made sense. Like it all kind of tracked. The Nameless were from Cavan. Um, his pitch line, which again I think has been put out there, so this isn't spoiling anything, was what scares the Jedi? What are the Jedi afraid of? And so the idea was that there was this boogeyman, this sort of nursery rhymes scary thing that would be told to the younglings to like, if you don't watch out, the Nameless will come get you. And then figuring out what the Nameless were and how they worked within the Force and what they were actually doing when they were husking someone was incredibly complicated, as you might guess, because it's bringing a concept into Star Wars that wasn't there before and skirts right on danger line, or the red line of like, how to put this, like there are ways that you could do things that can kind of break a lot of other stories,
Mm.
that if you do it, you're like, well, if that works for the Nameless, then why doesn't it work that way for Grogu, whatever. And so there was a ton of time spent on both making the Nameless seem a credible threat within the story we were telling, but also make sure that they could exist in the larger galaxy, but also not exist in the larger galaxy, because you didn't really want other characters like Grogu finding a Nameless and having to deal with it. Like, that was something we spent a lot of time figuring out how to do, and like the way that the Jedi would not, there was a reason they needed to not talk about the Nameless and not tell people what they experienced, because of the blight, right? Because if you allowed other people to go to Planet X and find Nameless, and it wasn't just about defending the Jedi from this potentially terrifying weapon. It was about protecting the entire galaxy. So figuring out ways that seemed organic and natural to expand the Nameless threat out in the way that we did, so the actions of the Jedi seem justified, right? Because they're taking they're keeping a secret, which is to some degree antithetical to the Jedi way. Although if you dig into the lore, it's not at all
Yeah.
antithetical to the Jedi way. They keep tons of secrets, but when you see it front and center that they are deciding to hide this, basically, it feels a little different on the page than just sort of implying that they do this kind of thing. So we really wanted to make it feel natural and organic and justified more than anything else. And I think the book and the books do a very good job of explaining why this is so crucial to allow not just the galaxy to be safe, but also to let the Nameless like live their lives, right? Like do what the Forces kind of evolved them to do, so they can be happy too. So it's a happy ending for, well, not everybody, but plenty of people.
That the Nameless were some of my favorite parts of all of the High Republic. They were such a good, just oh shit moment every time they showed
Yeah.
up.
Yep.
I've talked a lot about the villains as we've had this chat, but I do want to end by talking about Avar and Elzar, the heroes. I
Sure.
really love that you all got to explore what happens when Jedi fall in love. Elzar was rightfully compared to Anakin so many times, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so great that at the end he's able to do what Anakin couldn't and put
Right.
aside who he loves for the betterment of the whole galaxy. And now they're like this cool yin and yang thing, like the dot
Mm-hmm.
of light and the dot of dark.
I'm glad you saw that, because when I first pitched this to Mike, like a lot of what happened in trials, like Mike and I are both in New York, so I can like see him, and so like we'll get together and I'll be like, well, this is what I'm thinking about doing. And when I talked about the ending, I said, this is how I want to do it. And I drew a yin and yang symbol. And then I put the dot and the dot. And I said, this is Avar and this is Elzar. So like it's in my High Republic notebook. I don't have it with me today, but I could show you, that I'm not just making this up. I actually did that. So the idea that it landed for you that way makes me happy, because that's what I was going for. Um, the key with Avar and Elzar, though, is not necessarily that they let each other go. I mean, they did, but it's that they love without attachment.
Hmm.
And so their love is as strong as it ever was, and they are very, very into each other and dig each other very much, and would be making out constantly if they could. But their ability to not be attached, so attached that they are going to let great harm come to others because they want to be together, they like want that, is I think one of the highest exemplars of what the Jedi Order is supposed to be
Yeah.
about. The Jedi, they're not robots. They're not people who don't love, care, feel. They feel all those things as deeply as anybody else does. And I think there's a section in this book where Bell reflects on that directly. But
That moment
the
of just kind of sensing it and being like, good for them.
yeah, totally. But it doesn't mean that the thing that makes them like beautiful and glorious is their ability to say, I can just love and I won't let it um turn me dark, right? I won't let it curdle and become a dark emotion. I will let the Force guide me, basically. All the things that have been said by all the Jedi and all the stories that we've all read and loved over the decades. And I think the way that Avar and Elzar's story ends is as strong and strong and as strong as an example of what the Jedi Order is supposed to be about. Beyond the dogma, beyond the rules, beyond anything else, just like that thing they do is what the Jedi are supposed to do.
You said it very well, that they are still very much in love with each other. They're just not physically together, but they are still connected. They're still on
Yeah.
Sophros.
Hmm.
Yeah, just
I mean, I
fantastic
think you're
ending.
connected to anyone you love, right? Like whether you're with them or not, if you love them, there's a connection there, and that's I mean, they're also in this weird metaphysical place where they can kind of have mental communication and the things that they do. And the Song of the Force helps out too. Like they still get to text basically, I guess. But it's certainly not the version of their lives that they would have chosen if they were completely free. And there's the moment when one of the moments I'm really proud of in the writing, like the writing level of the book, is when Avar goes deep, deep, deep into the Song of the Force, which is obviously the Force itself, deeper than she's ever gone before, to try to understand what's actually happening on the planet and how they might be able to find a way to stop it, to stop the blight. And when she is going through it, there's a moment where she realizes that if she wanted to, she could essentially become one with the Force. She could just let herself dissolve into it in the way that we see people like Luke Skywalker or Qui-Gon Jinn or Yoda, Obi-Wan. Like she can do that just by kind of deciding to do it. That choice is available to her, and she knows it is. And she pulls back, and then she turns to Elzar and is like, like this, I had this crazy experience. And Elzar's like, yeah, well, of course you did. I had it too. And the idea that they were in it together and they both decided together to pull back at the same time, when they could have kind of no harm, no foul been together in the Force, in a Force paradise, I guess, whatever you want to call it, and chose not to. Good stuff. Really good
Great
stuff.
stuff. Well, I'll have one more question for you then. Is there anything that I didn't bring up here that you're just really proud of, whether it's Trials or Light or anything in the High
I mean,
Republic that,
all of
yeah.
it. I can't believe that I was such a such a big part of this story. That I got to write the beginning and the end, and did it with my friends, and wrote a story with my daughter. There's so many things that are amazing about it that I'm going to take years to really process, I think. But there's there's a part in the book that we haven't talked about that I is one of my favorite things in the entire book, which is the battle between Markian and Bell,
Mhm.
and the saber fight that they have, and the way the way that Bell is basically getting his ass kicked and he's going to lose, because Markian, even though he doesn't have the Force, is an extremely skilled warrior and predator and just very, very, very frightening being. And then and Loden is feels lost because he wanted to be able to end Markian as sort of, call it what you want, but as revenge, or to avenge his dead master Loden Greystorm. And then Loden shows up in a classic kind of Force vision way, and the conversation they have and the way they talk, and getting another moment of Loden and Bell, because I think their relationship is one of the best things I did in the entire High Republic, was the way those two were together. And that's why it hits so incredibly hard in Rising Storm when Loden dies.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to just get a little bit more of it, just felt I loved it. And the way that Loden motivates Bell with his classic kind of I don't know, dude, it's kind of up to you. You've got the strength inside you if you want to use it, but you have to make the decision. I can't do it for you, which is completely Loden. It felt like the character was the character, and just getting to see him again in that moment when not just Bell, but the entire galaxy really needed him. I don't know. Again, I really was happy that I got to do that.
And yeah, fantastic bookend from Light into Trials,
Yep.
and yeah, getting just a
Yep.
little bit more Loden was always a
Mm-hmm.
good thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that'll do it. I've kept you long enough, but I'll
This has
just
been great.
say thank you to you. I'll use you as an avatar for all 11 writers and also Mike
Sure.
Siglain, but just like thank you for all your hard work. The High Republic truly was an experience that I looked forward to every single book and comic. And I know there are a couple more comics left, but it's been an amazing ride that I know we were all very, very grateful for. So thank you.
Well, I can say definitively, it was our pleasure. It was a lot of work, but I think we all were very, very thrilled to be part of it and thrilled to be creating it alongside the readers and knowing that we had such a receptive, engaged audience was just a joy and not the kind of thing you always get. So I'm so happy we did it. I'm sad it's over, but I can't wait to just hear what people think and meet people who discover it in years to come because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I hope that I would love for more High Republic era stories, but like I also hope that they use the whole Project Luminous as a blueprint moving forward. Like I would love to see. Now I'm just talking to Lucasfilm again. Like do this again.
Uh-huh.
This was great.
Yeah. Well, I'll let them know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Charles. If you haven't read Trials of the Jedi, sorry about all this, but it's out right now. um, thank you again, Charles. Thank all of you for watching or listening, and may the Force be with you.